As the clock strikes 7, the vibes are alive. Inner circles here where voices thrive. Turn on your screens, let the magic unfold. Listening and healing as stories are told. Come one, come all, this is your time. No topics too tough, just heed the calls. From mental health woes to justice we seek. Together we rise for the strong and the meek. A safe space for all, let's lift every voice. Inner Circle podcast where hearts unite. Sharing our truths, bringing hope to the light. Community strong, we're never alone. Together as one, we've created a home. With laughter and love, we break down the walls. No topics too tough, just heed the call. From mental health woes to justice we seek. Together we rise for the strong and the meek. A safe space for all, let's lift every voice. So join the conversation, let's set the tone. Inner Circle podcast where love is well known.
Good evening and welcome to the Inner Circle podcast. This is the space wherein we amplify immigrant voices, spark conversation that matters to our community. And tonight we have a very special topic and a very special guest. Our topic for tonight is how addiction can be a coping mechanism for underlying mental health issues. Sometimes when folks have mental health, they tend to, rely on substance abuse and things like that. So tonight we have Miss Johanna Rosa here, who's going to be providing us some great education just to inform our community about mental health and addiction. So welcome. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Miss Rosa. I have my panelists tonight. We are only two in the house, me and Andrea. So we're going to be making sure, right? It's a conversation, as you know. So this is your show. This is your community show. You can follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter or X, on LinkedIn, and anywhere you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So we'll introduce my panelists, and then we'll give Ms. Rosa the opportunity to introduce herself and what she does. So, Andrea.
Yes, good evening, Andrea here. I look forward to a great conversation. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to have you here, and I'm excited for the audience to learn more about the topic and get some gems from you. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So again, Joanna, welcome so much to Inner Circle podcast. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Can you share a little bit about your background and what inspired you to go into therapist, to become a therapist?
Yeah, thanks for that question. One of my favorites to answer because I think it's important not only to think about what got us here, but what impact do we want to have in the community. I started my journey to be a therapist from my own experiences with mental health, right? And navigating the challenges of life transitions, and also wanting somebody who looked like me, who could understand me.
Yeah.
And I always thought about that growing up and as a young adult, really looking for somebody who there was a shorthand with, who could understand some of the more nuanced ways that we exist in this world. Okay. And so that's what led me to therapy and to really look at the intersection of substance use and mental health and why people gravitate towards substances in order to manage mental health symptoms.
Okay. And how has that journey been like for you, right? Since you became a therapist, how has that journey been like for you? Has it been fulfilling, or how would you describe it? How has the journey as a therapist been for you? Has it been fulfilling?
Yeah, the journey as a therapist, I will say the training portion of it can be rather difficult because there are a lot of institutional biases for people of color to navigate being a professional.
Yeah.
And we're also in a shortage as well for Black therapists. And so that's been difficult to navigate. A lot of us have higher waiting times. And so, right, seeing the influx of people seeking help yet having access issues is also something that I'm definitely keeping my ear to the ground on. The training period of becoming a therapist, right? So you go to school and you learn a set of skills and you practice in this environment. Then you transition to the clinical practical part. That is very intense. Oftentimes we're working adults with families to raise and trying to establish a new career. So there's stressors in a number of areas. And then there's the licensing exams. And so I know there's been some work around looking at how the licensing exams have also been a barrier for Black and Brown clinicians to enter into the field because it can be more difficult in terms of how the questions are posed, right? You're not looking at it culturally responsive lens. We have this joke amongst us Black therapists is that when you take those licensing exams, you really have to think like a white man. And what would a white man do? Because that's really the answer of what they're seeking. They're not seeking a culturally responsive and more holistic, person-centered methodology. So that's just something we talk about all the time. And especially as we train interns, we encourage them to think about not only self-care, because it's a difficult process. A lot of us have 880 hours or more in order to establish licensing. In some cases, it's 4,000. And so that's the better part of 2 years, right? And so self-care is definitely important. And then also, especially as a Black clinician, how do you balance who you are as a person with the work that you're doing?
Well, folks, tonight we are discussing addiction as a coping mechanism for underlying mental health struggles, and we have Johanna Rosa with us, who will be providing us some great education. You know, it's going to be a great conversation. So you can contribute to the conversation by putting a comment in the chat or calling our number 817-600-1525. Stanford, welcome. Welcome from the great state of Tennessee. And so, Andrew, I'll start with you, right? Do you have any question for Joanna?
Yeah, Joanna, can you explain how addiction and mental health struggles are interconnected?
Absolutely. We came from a paradigm where psychology really saw addiction as a separate thing and not as a psychological, right, way of coping. And so there really was a divide for a while where they treated the two things separately. And the reason why I have a dual licensure, so LADC is a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and LPCC, licensed professional clinical counselor, is because I really wanted to see the integration between both of them happen, because substance use is a mental health response and vice versa, right? A mental health symptomology can exacerbate substance use. So that's one of the reasons why I felt strongly about being knowledgeable in both areas, if you will, because it is really one and the same. And it's really looking at why people are using substances to manage their mental health symptoms. And those could range from, right, anxiety, depression, anger management issues, relationship dysfunction, and the list goes on and on. Yet it really is unpacking why are the substances most effective for you in managing your mental health symptoms? And then uncovering what other ways could we substitute other skills in place of the substances. And so when I worked in a substance use treatment center, I really worked to provide a whole person approach to say, yes, you use substances as a way of coping, and on your journey towards recovery, what could that look like in a different way? And so really not stigmatizing the substance use, normalizing the fact that it's a response for something that's happening for you. And we also acknowledge that substance use, it impacts the reward pathway in our brain. And the reward pathway It goes towards food, sex, right? Healthy relationship, that love feeling. That's
Sure.
all that wrapped up in it. And so substance use was really taking the place of, right, that good feeling or that way to disconnect or that way to avoid
Okay.
in terms of mental health symptomology too. So that's why I really like doing a deep dive as to what caused it, so that way we can
Okay.
understand at a deeper level how we
Okay.
can start addressing it.
Okay. Thank you. It's time for a question. Question from you to Joanna.
First of all, good evening, everybody. I'm so sorry for being a little bit late.
You're
Thank
good.
you, Joanna, for being here and sharing the knowledge. Because we all learn every day in our lives. So thank you for being here. And hi, Andrea. So we're talking about addiction and mental health. So um, I got a question like. So since people use addiction, to like cover up their mental health issues, like, sometimes you just do it to like numb the pain, but all of those are like temporary cover up, wherein, I mean, if you drink, it's not gonna take the pain away. It's not gonna, solve the problem. It's just temporarily. And then every day you're gonna keep drinking so you feel good. That's how the addiction come about, right? But um what are some like more healthier coping strategies or mechanisms, that you can use to like manage that mental health issue or problem that you have, instead of like, leading toward the addiction by drinking or maybe smoking or taking pills just to fall asleep? What are some more healthier mechanisms, or that, or strategies that one can
Mhm.
use?
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for the question. I love it. And this is part of that recovery journey that I was speaking to earlier, is understanding what healthier coping skills they could start using in place of the substance of choice. And
Hmm.
so I really look at what's available to the person rather than having them do something that might not necessarily fit who they are or what's in their daily routine.
Sure.
And so, what I help clients do is look at what works for them and what doesn't. Oftentimes, I like to pair mindfulness with cognitive behavioral therapy, because we start understanding why those substances were being used and what were they being substituted for. So what was it causing for you? Because in a sense, a substance is a reward for something, right? And that reward
Hmm.
can be uh, delaying consequences. It could be avoiding, right, life responsibilities. It could be to cope with depressive or anxious symptoms. It
Hmm.
could be a number of things. Yet,
Okay.
what is the root cause that you were trying to achieve with the substance? And then what's next? And so I like to piece it that way, because we really start uncovering deeper than don't use substances.
Okay.
Right.
At what
And
point, like, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your
and I
thought.
was going to, yeah, absolutely. And so mindfulness helps us be more aware of what is actually happening internally, both
Hmm.
mentally and emotionally, that's
Hmm.
causing our desire for use,
Hmm.
and then pairing it with a skill that's realistic for the person.
Okay. At what point, like alcohol, like drinking alcohol, right? I mean, most folks in our community, right, like to maybe party every weekend,
Yeah.
do stuff. At what point, maybe like, drinking alcohol become an addiction, and how can you kind of relate that to maybe like a mental health? Because most folks might say, "Hey, man, I'm just enjoying myself," right? Is that if I, every time I come home or every weekend I'm drinking, I'm just enjoying myself.
Mhm.
When does it become addiction?
Yes, a great question, and I get that all the time. Addiction is technically a diagnosable disorder, right? And so there's a set number of criteria that you have to meet in order to be labeled as that particular disorder. So I also want to recognize that from a cultural standpoint, we see drinking a little differently, right? Than let's say a European male, right? And so I also want to call that out too, because what may seem problematic to a white doctor or a white provider, right, may not necessarily be problematic in our community. Yet there also is a level of what's healthier and what's not, right? Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Andrew, a question from you to Joanna.
Yeah. So one question that I do have is, since we're kind of going down this hole of kind of just unresolved like pain and whatnot, how do trauma and unresolved emotional pain contribute to addiction? I know you kind of touched on it briefly, but can you kind of take a deeper dive into that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Unresolved or unhealed trauma, as I like to think of it, is more often than not a primary motivating factor for substance use. And I say that because we're working with people who have survived into adulthood with this unresolved trauma, this unhealed trauma. And the way they've learned to manage that is through substance use or other addictive patterns. And so addictive patterns also, right, relationships, sex, food, shopping, gambling. So those are all addictive patterns as well, because they give us that feel-good feeling and take us away from, temporarily, take us away the thing that hurts.
Okay.
And so,
go ahead. Finish your talk. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so oftentimes, why I like the mental health seamless with the substance use is because as we're working on decreasing substance use, we're starting to now uncover what was happening trauma-wise or what this person was trying to hide from as we're lowering substance use. And so I practice a harm reduction approach, which is what we're working on is lowering use. So that way, as you lower use, you can increase skill building. And then eventually the person will decide what's best for them in terms of substance use. A number of times they choose abstinence. And so there is a difference between a harm reduction model and an abstinence only model. And those are programs where you have to be substance use free in order to engage in care.
Okay. I know you mentioned about gambling. So is addiction, is it only substance abuse, or does it extend to like things like gambling or other harmful habits?
Yeah, gambling is definitely one of those addictive patterns that can go into, and give me 1 second here.
Yeah.
So I have the DSM, and there is a gambling disorder in the book that can be diagnosed. And
so in your line of work, then do you deal with folks maybe that are addicted to gambling or to some kind of a behavior, or you only deal with substance abuse?
No, I deal with other addictive patterns as well.
Okay, that's good. It's time for a question from you to Joanna.
So Joanna,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So at what point in time, right? At what point in time in a person's life, right, can they realize that they've been addicted to stuff? Like, for example, you mentioned, like, because people get addicted to a lot of stuff. It's not just drinking alcohol or taking meds or gambling or, like sex, At what point in time in that person's life that they will identify that thing as an addiction where, they be like, okay, I think this is the point that I try to seek help, How do you identify that in a person, or I don't know how do you identify that in a person that they get to that point in their life to know that, okay, this is where I stop, or this is where, I take a trend or I take a turn, How
Mhm.
how do we identify that? At what point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the question. How it's identified, and I would say I'm going to go back to the DSM because
Mhm.
there is a good point in that criteria that they make that this addiction has significantly disrupted most areas of your life. So, like
Mhm.
ruined relationships, financial strains, right? You can't get to the work, or your work is underperforming. Family routines have been disrupted because of this addictive trait, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's a number of criteria that they look at. And I will say, the person who's seeking treatment,
Mhm.
there is a level of, I don't know, but kind of like, I don't want to be here, I don't have a problem, right? There's that level of disbelief,
Yeah.
yet also the recognizing that something is wrong. And so that's okay.
Okay.
I
Last
don't
one.
want to stigmatize the fact that somebody is seeking help and doesn't know
Mhm.
where to go. It's okay at whatever level you're at to
Okay.
seek treatment, to seek care, or to seek guidance.
Okay.
What I will say is this: in terms of recognizing when you've hit right your wall with your addictive pattern, more often than not, it's family and friends that are telling this person that it's enough or that things have gone too far.
Sure.
And so family plays a big role in that recovery and healing as well, because addiction, no matter what it is, also impacts the family.
Okay. Well, folks, tonight we are discussing addiction. How can addiction be a coping mechanism for underlying mental health struggles? And we have Johanna Rosa with us sharing her knowledge, giving us some great information, giving us some, she's educating us and educating our listeners out there. So we really, really appreciate it, Johanna. First though, you mentioned like, to stand for question, right? Can someone actually realize that they have an addiction, or as you said, right, does it have to be from family and friends? And even in that case, right, I bring it back to our community. Sometimes it's hard for us to admit whether we have a problem. Is it at what point, right? Is like like or someone like you, professional like you, step in and say, you know what, I think that person need help.
You know, I absolutely believe that people, in those moments of quiet, in those moments of reflection, those
Hmm.
who are experiencing addictive patterns,
Yeah.
do have a recognition that their behavior is not really in line with what they want.
Okay.
And I've certainly seen people who have just said, "I think I'm going too far. I think this is a lot. I don't like where I'm going," and seek help that way. And so, I I want to caution that this isn't a one size fits all approach, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
People
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
come to me and come to substance use treatment services for a variety of reasons in a variety of ways. And so, that definitely has been wonderful to see someone who has recognized that they've gone pretty deep, and
Okay.
then all of a sudden decide I need help.
Okay, and there's a question here, and I will kind of paraphrase this or rephrase this for you. Is shopping like an addiction? Shopping is like you see all these Amazon packages every day, all day. It's like I mean, it's like, hey, is shopping an addiction, and how?
Yeah,
First of all,
yeah,
that's the
it
question.
certainly can
Shopping.
be. Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yes, 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 because it hits that same feel good pathway. That feels good when you hit that button,
Yeah.
right? And when you get that package.
Mhm.
My question is it causing financial strain? Is it causing strain in your relationships?
Okay.
Right? Do you need that or do you want that? And so these are some of the things that I help people go through. Like, okay, what is
Okay.
it for you that feels so good when you swipe or you press buy, right?
Yeah.
And then where are other areas in your life that you feel the same feeling?
Mhm.
And then we start working on modifying our behavior patterns. Okay, if shopping feels good, what does this other thing feel good, right? And how can you incorporate it in your day so that way you buy one less thing or you make one less trip?
Okay.
Mhm.
Do you work with couples in your line of work? Because
I do.
right,
I work with
based on this
couples.
question,
Yes.
right, it's like someone partner might be shopping all day, right, and they have a problem with it, but it's like, so do you work with couples?
Can you say that again? I missed it.
Do you work with couples? Do you work with
Yes.
folks? Okay, okay, that's good. Okay,
Mhm.
and Andrea, question from you to Joanna.
I'm sorry. I had to chuckle because I know there's probably listeners out there waiting to talk about the shopping piece, and so thank you for shedding light on that and things that, like, I think sometimes when we think about addiction, we the first thing we think about is just substances, and like, yeah, substances. I would say so. I just kind of want to piggyback on kind of where what we've been talking about as far as like identifying trends. You talked about, obviously you as a clinician, you use your DSM-5 book, and then you talked about also how the patient can also, they pretty much know kind of when they've kind of got their limit. But when it comes to like family and friends, can you kind of take a deeper dive on how they can differentiate between casual substance use and addiction that's rooted in deeper mental health struggles? And I want to kind of throw in a caveat, obviously, like with the African community, I would say like we see drinking. I can speak for my own, family and stuff. Drinking is like that's like not that's just like normal. It's like a normal, but like I know people that drink every day. I mean, they can drink it with their food or rice or
Mhm.
whatever, but we all know like that's a lot. Like a drink every day or a drink every meal, that is actually a lot. And so for the listeners out there, especially, our community, can you kind of give maybe some pointers on kind of like what to look for when it could be like, okay, we might have a conversation. That might be a little too much. What's going on? I think that will be helpful for us to kind of just um, be able to differentiate, if that makes sense.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. I would encourage family and friends to approach that person with curiosity
Mm-hmm.
and openness, because when we come from a place of concern, sometimes it can have like a feeling of shame. And so when we approach with curiosity, we're more prone to have open discussion about what this means for that person. And I always go back to what does it mean for them, because there's a reason why it's happening. We're just not aware of it.
Mm.
So what does that drink with every meal mean for them? What does, right, drinking every day mean for them? What does it do for them? What's the purpose behind it, right? And so when we're able to have that discussion in a curious and open way, um, we're not in intention, we're not in conflict with that person who we're genuinely concerned with, because that at the end of the day is what you're trying to convey, right? That you're concerned for this person and you're seeing a troubling behavior pattern. Yet more often than not, right, when the reason why I do see couples, families, etc., right, and more often than not, it's that communication piece that breaks down, that causes that conflict and tension, because we're coming from a place of hurt, and then that person is defensive. So if we can be curious, right, that promotes open conversation. And
Yeah.
I again would say what's problematic, because what I consider to be problematic is going to be different than you, Abe, than you, Andrea, than you, Stanford, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you define problematic and what does it look like for that person is also helpful to understand as well.
Yeah. And then, yeah, and just to piggyback on that, when do you even start such a conversation, right? Because to your point, right, you got to be sensitive to that. I say it might be a normal behavior for the person, but when do you even
Mhm.
start that conversation? And even when you do start a conversation and the person becomes defensive, do you then maybe try to seek help for them?
So in terms of defensiveness, I honestly like to do some level setting and understanding everyone's intention in the room. So when I see couples, right, and if there's concerns with substance use, I want to understand the intention behind having this conversation in this space today.
Okay.
So what is your intention with this conversation and what are you hoping to convey? What is your intention and what are you hoping to convey? And then where can we meet in the middle towards common understanding? Because at the end of the day, we just want to be seen, heard, valued, and loved, right?
Yeah.
And there's this thing that's causing tension. So the quicker we can diffuse that, the quicker we can have open and honest dialogue.
Okay. It's time for a question from you, to Joanna.
So uh, what are like in your professional area right now, right? What are some like treatment options for like battling addiction that battling mental health issues that leads to addiction because it starts with the mental health issues first, and then if those are not resolved, and then people go about finding their own way to resolve them to like cut it out, which is all temporary, and that always leads to addiction. So what are some treatment options that you can like share for us?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I would say it can be as simple as a Google search or a phone call, first of all. I think I would first ask, what are you hoping to address, right? And so with substance use treatment, there are a number of programs where it's like on an outpatient basis. So you would attend after hours, after work and stuff like that, and meet with a group. So there's ways that way. If it's pretty significant, if it's pretty severe, and it requires a hospital stay, that's a different route.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an outpatient person, so I see people just whenever they're available during the week. And so that's a little different. And then you also have to ask, is your goal abstinence or is your goal reduction?
Mm.
And either is fine for the person. And I know there could be some different opinions about that, yet that's the reason why these programs exist, because it's the one size fits approach doesn't work for everyone. And so if
Okay.
it's to reduce use, okay, great. And if it's to be abstinent, that's okay too. The other
Okay.
piece is mental health. Will the program provide mental health support as well? There are more programs now that are increasing that availability.
Mm.
And then there are still some that are just focused on substance use treatment. And so if you want to make that distinction, right, look for those pieces there. The other thing is support groups. There are a
Mm.
number of great support groups here in Minnesota that address sexual addiction, gambling addiction, substance use treatment. They even have support groups for families that are experiencing substance use as well. And so that also could be a great avenue to plug in
Mm.
for
Okay.
different kinds of supports.
Okay. Well, I'll ask this question, right, is from our listener here. Idea addictive or harmful behaviors that children and teens tend to turn to as a coping mechanism, and what are those?
Mm-hmm, yes. Uh,
Okay.
phone, so social media, right? And
Uh,
gaming are the two big ones that I see. And so, how do you keep
but
an eye on?
those are not only for teens though. It's like everyone seems to be addicted to that one. Phone and social media. It's not only for kids these days. You see, you go somewhere with your friends, right? It's like you guys are having great conversation, and then you see someone just into their phone. It's like so.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead,
Yeah.
go ahead, Joanna.
So, right, that gaming and that social media could be avoidance.
Mhm.
It could be a number of things. They don't want to engage in the particular environment, or right. So it can be used so much so that it tips into more addictive patterns.
Mhm.
The other thing I want to say is that with kids, because the world is in the state that it's in, there's a lot happening, and kids aren't necessarily equipped to say what that is. And so it often comes out in different ways, like anger, depression, anxiety. And so it's also, how are they expressing their feelings, or how are they expressing, right, what's happening internally for them. That's
Okay.
important to keep an eye on as well. But I would say the two biggest ones that I see now is really gaming and social media that kids are having a struggle with
Mhm.
in terms of balancing engagement, right, peer-to-peer engagement, and then being able to be on their phone as well.
Okay. I mean, now that you mentioned social media, right? Is it is it contributing to more addiction in these days and
Absolutely.
times? Not only
You don't
like
even have to. You don't have to finish that sentence. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
okay, okay.
Yes, because it's creating unrealistic expectations that
Mm,
we're constantly consuming.
mm,
And so we don't have a clear sense of what's real and what's not on social media.
mhm,
And then social media is always promoting happy, 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 right? This false narrative that everything's
mhm,
great.
mhm,
And so that can also skew the perceptions of teens that everything
mm,
has to be at this level or else it's not good enough, which then causes despair, anger, depression, anxiety, right?
mhm. As a
Mhm.
therapist, how do you approach that? How do you approach treatment? I mean, in such a
Well,
situation. Yeah.
yeah, I would say this, it's not just the teen, it's the family as well, because those
Mm,
patterns are created for a reason, right?
okay,
And
okay.
so I really take a whole family approach, talking about the family unit and what their routines are in
Mhm,
order to support that teen's mental health journey. And so if
okay.
social media is a big aspect of what's causing, right, that despair, that sadness, those depressive symptoms, anxiety,
Mhm.
then how can we modify their routine with the family's help in order to establish something different?
Okay. Andrea, question from you to Joanna.
Eye opening. I'm just this is really good. So I was going to kind of piggyback off of this because I know there's people out there listening. So can you give some pointers to parents? Because I know, like, I would say, I'm kind of on both. Kind of just thinking about just our community. I don't know if sometimes families recognize like how social media can really be impactful, to a child's perception of the world.
Mhm.
Can you give parents kind of some insights on like how they can um, kind of help? I don't know. I don't really know if it's really help, but like just kind of be
I mean,
mindful and kind of just like observe and like what to look for. Like, is there a certain like is there like a way for families or like a parent to be like, okay, maybe my child only gets like certain hours of screen time per day, or
Mhm.
like is there like protocols that will be helpful for the group to like
sure.
understand? I think that can sometimes be it's people may not be aware. So like what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on like cultural
Oh,
perspective?
sure, sure, yeah. Um, I don't want to speak in absolute, so I'm going to say, right, take this with the caveat that what you see with your family might
Mm,
be completely different or spot on. Um, One of the things that I talk with families about is the fact that these phones have us glued to the fact that we have instant access to everything, right? And so what that's done is it's limited our ability to delay
mhm,
gratification, and that takes our attention and it kind of morphs it into something that's always looking for this. Like it's got to be right now, right now, right now. And so delayed gratification is actually a really useful skill for kids to have because they are able to regulate their emotions enough in order to achieve an objective and then get the reward after. But with phones, the reward is immediate. And
mm,
so that's why the emotional regulation can be off, especially with kids who are on their phone a lot, because they're used to instant response and they're not used to how all of us are old enough to know when phones weren't around, right? And
yeah.
having to go to the library, go to the Dewey Decimal System, right? And we had a longer time frame between what it was we needed and then getting it.
Mhm.
So I want
Okay.
to say that first because I think that's really important to understand. Um, do families have monitoring time? Right? Do they have pockets of time where the kiddo is allowed on the phone or the tablet and then not?
Mm,
Because the other thing we're seeing is that face to face engagement, the way we engage person to person, is also changing because of social media.
yeah. Yeah.
So the ability
Uh,
to have conversation and engage in empathy is also
mhm.
changing as well.
Okay. That's great. Well, folks, tonight we are discussing addiction and coping mechanism. We have Joanna Rosa in the house, sharing her knowledge, giving us some great information. So you can contribute to the conversation by calling our number 817-600-1525. If you have a question, a comment, or concern, or you can also put a comment in the chat. So this is the Inner Circle podcast. We bring you great conversation like tonight, coping mechanism and addiction and mental health, it's like bringing all those together. And they know, right? It's like talking about social media. I think that's the biggest, that's the biggest addiction these days and stuff like that. So I don't know how you deal with it, Joanna, but man, that's big because you see folks where you and someone go to a restaurant and it's just like this, I mean, it's a lot of that. But it's time for a question from you to Joanna.
Joanna, you good that you whoever asked the question about some addictive stuff for teens. Um, in my line of work, right? You got teenagers who's there. Okay, some of them some of them leave their homes and come to where I work. So I'm in the military. Okay, so you got teens who like 17, 18 and join the military, join the army, the Marine Corps, whatever it is. All right. And some of them leave their homes and just join because they had some trauma at home. They've been abused at home, and they had a lot going on at home and just chose that path. Okay. And they joined the military to like kind of a like serve as some little cushion where they do something different so they don't look back, and stuff like that. And then they come in, right? And with the pressure and the force, the of everything is it weighs down on them at a young age because they're not used to they haven't seen the war, they just jump right in. And some of them start to like some addictive stuff is the vaping, like the nicotine. A lot of kids nowadays vape, and when you ask them, they tell you, "Oh, I'm just trying to calm my stress," and they vape and they start drinking, and by the time you look, is all the way up there. So for me, my question is personally for me, because how what do I have to do? Like what kind of help can you give me that I can be able to help kids like that? Because I deal with them every day, and
Okay.
just to sit them down and start talking to them, trying to help. Like what extra help can you give me that I can be able to help a lot of these kids that I deal with?
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that question. We have to acknowledge that tobacco industry directly markets to children. That's the first thing, right? So the culpability, the accountability has to be on their shoulders for what they're doing. Making nicotine, bubblegum and grape and strawberry is a very deliberate move because it opens up, right, another billion, gazillion dollars
Mhm.
in revenue. So
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge that because it's difficult. In terms of kids with vaping, man, sometimes it's just peer pressure.
Yeah.
It is that desirability to fit in. It's that desirability to be cool. It's that desirability that I am socially connected in this space, right? And school is often, right, the first place that they pick that up. And so what I want to ask you is that how do you create a space for social connectedness where that particular, right, that vape, that particular thing is not needed in that space?
Yeah.
And I ask that because schools, right, have some ability to start picking up on that, but they don't necessarily have the infrastructure for that. They don't necessarily have the people who are dialed in to kids from a social connectedness standpoint. And we know that, right, our school systems are underfunded, understaffed, and there's more cuts coming. And so I want to put that out there because I think we have an ability for those who are in schools
Mhm.
to connect with kids in a different way where they won't seek that in order to be accepted.
Okay. Can just to his point though, he's talk about stress. Can stress leave folks, right? I mean, like talk about someone being so stressful in a stressful situation, and then they go to the military, some place like that, right? They're not going to have empathy or sympathy for you. I mean, how do you what would be your message to kids who are going through that and say, you know what, let me just go to the military and try to get away?
Yeah.
What would be your message to them?
I think my first question is, what are you running from?
Yeah.
Right? What made you make that kind of decision? And right, and to some it's a perfectly reasonable decision to make, and for some it can be an extreme choice. And so what made you make that decision? And then also understanding that the military is a wonderful career to have. Is that the outcome, or is that the goal that you're trying to achieve? I have two brothers in the military. They're both veterans, so I completely understand. The military can be really transformative for some, and it can be really, really harmful for others.
Okay.
And it does depend on mental health. Because the military is meant to make you in the image of what that particular branch is. It's not to look at you as a whole person and go, what do you need? Right? That's not the kind of paradigm that they set up. Yeah. And so that's the other piece that I was thinking, is that's an identity that you're taking on. And so what does that identity mean to you? Because, you know, for veterans, part of their identity is identifying as a former military person, right? Identifying as a vet. And so we thank them for their service, but you see how it gets carried into other areas of their life, and that becomes the fabric of their identity. Does that help?
Yeah. I think that's help. I mean, and the other thing is, right, we live in very stressful times, right? There's so many things pulling at us, you know, folks so many folks, I say that, right, living in America, living in the world these days, right, is stressful by itself. I mean, how does stress lead to maybe addiction or substance abuse or some sort of a bad behavior?
Yeah, simply wanting to find a way to ease that stress will lead somebody towards shopping, gaming, vaping, smoking, drinking, etc. And that's one of the reasons why I do skills building as a part of my therapeutic process, is because we have to replace a person reaching for cigarettes or alcohol with something different instead. And then understanding we're not, on average, given great tools to manage stress on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And so we don't learn this magically. We don't have this built into our brain. And so we often learn it from our peers, our family, right? We learn it from the media that we're consuming. We learn it in different ways. And so when people try something and they go, oh, that worked, I'll keep doing that. And because our brain is really wired on patterns, it goes, oh, that worked before, do that again.
Okay.
Right? And so I use the same analogy with anger management, that anger in itself is a reward for stopping the thing that's making you uncomfortable. And then there's shame and guilt after that, right? So then you go do the apology tour and you say, I'm sorry, and you repair, and then it goes right back. As soon as you're uncomfortable again or in discomfort of some kind, you explode in anger because it makes it go away, and then you're living the cycle again, right? And so how do we disrupt what's causing that discomfort so you don't use anger to try and stop it?
Okay. Andrea, question from you. I mean, it's like, Joanna, man, your knowledge is deep, you know.
She's giving us therapy right now. I'm like learning so much.
Yeah.
I'm like, let me set a timer on my social media right now. So I'm not on it all day. Joanna, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We're learning a lot, and I'm just like, I have so many questions, and I know we have such short time, but I just kind of want to go back to like vaping and like tobacco use. I know that's the big thing right now in schools, right? You know, what would you say, or what advice would you give to parents that are listening that may have encountered, situation with their child? Like, how do you have a conversation, and like, what are kind of like steps to kind of just have the conversation? I know you talked about remaining curious, right? So, you don't have a defensive conversation, but like as a parent, what are steps to take to having conversations with their child if they've recognized that their child may have been involved in like vaping or tobacco use?
Yeah. Again, it's not a one size fits all, and right, you can have that discussion with your child about what that means to them. encouraging them to discuss with you the health risks, because there is risk. Even though it's in a liquid form, it is still harmful to our bodies. It does the same thing that cigarettes does, right? And so I have two children myself, 11 and 15. I have been very open about what drugs and alcohol do to our bodies, because I think it's helpful for them to understand. And when they come to that decision, they can make a more informed choice. What will that do to me long term? Because yeah, you're having fun now, yet you're killing cells. Right? You're killing your body. That is a poison.
Mm.
And so we have to temper that curiosity and that gentleness with also facts, because there is an active campaign around misinformation and disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And then also they've made the packaging, especially in our state in Minnesota, because marijuana is now legal to sell. Is there a distinction between those cartridges? Because it could either be nicotine or it could be THC.
Yeah.
And so that's a different conversation altogether.
Okay.
And what does that mean for you? We know from a biological standpoint that nicotine kicks into the same reward pathway that drugs and alcohol do.
Yeah.
So it's going to hijack that system, and it's going to make them feel good. It's going to make them feel seen, validated, right? The peers are all in cohesion against this thing. And so it's just like, okay, we have to temper how we feel and what we don't want our children to do with having information. Because there's a lot of misinformation, especially on social media, that they are consuming. And so again, pairing curious and open conversation with facts, and also having them understand what does that do to the growing brain.
Okay. And what's about situations where you have kids, right? Like, I mean, their parents maybe might be a regular, user of nicotine or vaping and things like that, or even alcohol, right? How do you protect them? How do you shield them? Because to your point, right, their brains now they're developed to, to distinguish whether it's good or bad.
And then also, is there a cultural component to it? That's the other layer that we have to look at it, is that from a cultural standpoint, drinking and smoking has a different level of meaning that it does to, white people. And so I also want to distinguish that, because that plays a role in it as well. And so when I'm working with families who are navigating substance use with their teen, or nicotine use, or some kind of other addictive pattern, we really have to understand from a family unit perspective, what does it mean to all of them? Because everybody's impacted by this. And it's not just a teen, but sometimes we as humans have a tendency to blame the person who's using.
Yeah.
You should know better. You should. But that's right.
Yeah.
For me, this is a community problem rather than an individual problem.
Got it.
And so that's why I like working with the family to co-create a plan to address the behavior, because it's really everyone's job to support this kiddo's growth.
Okay. So question here from our listener. In your experience, are most addiction or addictive behaviors connected to an underlying mental health, or are there other causes?
Yeah. I will admit that question is a little bit like the chicken and the egg, which came first. And I can say it can be, or the substance use can cause mental health concerns. And so it's really a toss-up. And that's why I like looking at an individual basis, because you really get to know what is happening for that person and their experiences on why they reach for substances or other addictive methods in order to soothe themselves. In order to stop whatever they wanted to stop.
Okay. Like folks from the immigrant community, right, where maybe home, maybe both parents don't drink or don't do anything, but then the kids start using substance abuse, or maybe start having fun, right? It might not be abuse or it might not be addiction, but if you as a therapist dealing with such a situation, what would be your message in that situation?
Oh, yeah. I have certainly had clients who experienced use or addictive patterns a little later in life. And I would say there isn't a rhyme or reason per se on what caused it. It's again based on them. More
Yeah.
often than not, it was some major stressor that happened, right?
Mhm.
And so we really look at if your inability to cope with that stressor, right, was not functioning. You didn't have anything
Mhm.
or any skill in order to address that particular stressor. How do we build it in?
Okay.
And then for those who use later in life, I always am the person who asks why. I sometimes tell my people I'm like a 5-year-old. I will ask why. Okay, why did that happen? Right? Because when we uncover why, we uncover how to address it.
Got it.
So what caused that use later on in life or when you moved out or right? And sometimes it's about traditional upbringing, right? And then all of a sudden you get out in the world. Sometimes it's because there really just isn't enough information that that particular person had about substances, and so they fell into it. There could be so many ways that they fell into it, but it really is like, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And then what made you continue?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. It's time for a question from you to Joanna.
Well, tonight, Joanna. I mean, we're learning a lot of stuff. You know, we're learning from you. You know, especially when we come to addiction. You know, because it all starts from like mostly it starts from the mental health stuff before it leads to addiction. Because, like you said, there be problems going on, and we just find ways to want to solve it. We just always temporary, and then it becomes more and more and more. Because every day you want to drink to just calm yourself down. But I got a question, right? Like, do you think, like, since we're discussing coping mechanism for mental health struggle, right? Do you think that silence or isolation, right? Do you think is best is a best approach to mental health issues instead of taking the path of addiction, like starting to drink or so? Do you think like that's a best path that works best for people?
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I think I'd like to say to that one is I don't want to call, I'm certainly not an absolute. All that my people know that. I don't want to label something good or bad, right or wrong.
Mm.
It's what's healthy and unhealthy.
Yeah.
And then how is it affecting you?
Mm.
And so if somebody is recognizing or if loved ones are saying, right, there is a problem, how do you have that conversation in a curious way? And
Mhm.
also, what avenue of care is right for you?
Yeah.
I'm an advocate that any help is help because sometimes just making it through that door can be transformative. And what's keeping that person from the door, right?
Yeah.
It is an obstacle. And so I'm always in awe at the people that I see show up every single day that I work because it took courage to get there. It took courage to want to face what you're facing. It takes courage to look inward at the things that hurts. It takes courage to want to, right, lower your use. It takes courage to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was like, your question, I get it, but again, it's not a one size fits all because we're all different and we all have different needs. There are some things that are similar, yet I always, and I'm that kind of provider where I right size the approach for the person in front of me. And that's where I start from.
Definitely. That's a good one. That's a good approach. Well, folks, there's a 1 hour show, right? Johanna, even though she's sharing great knowledge with us, she's giving us some great information. We can't keep her all night. So we'll just drag it for a few more minutes and then we'll try to wrap this up. So tonight we are discussing coping mechanism for underlying mental health struggles, addiction as a coping mechanism. So, and Joanna, she's providing us great information. You can still put a comment in the chat if you have a question or comment, or you can call our number 817-600-1525. Joanna, though, folks listening to you, right? As you said, especially folks that look like us, you don't have many of you people in that field,
Mhm.
sometimes struggle to get help. What's the message to them, right? Folks that are listening to you from our, like that, like us, right? It's like if they are struggling to find a provider or find a therapist, how how can you direct them?
Yeah, I would say please don't stop looking just
Mm,
because one provider might be might have a wait list or is
yeah.
full. Please don't stop looking. If
Mm.
you're looking for a provider that looks like you, we are out there.
Okay.
Okay, we are
Mm,
out there. It just takes a little bit more effort because
mm,
of just the way the system is designed, right?
mm, mm,
We in Minnesota, we don't have a high percentage of providers of color, and so that's why
mm,
it's important to keep going.
mm.
Um, I work at Empower Therapeutic Support Services as a Black-owned mental health clinic, and so
Okay.
um, if you are interested in services, definitely
Sure.
please seek us out. The
Okay.
caveat I will say, as I've learned, please check your insurance to see if we are in network.
Yeah.
Um, and then I want to say you're not alone.
Mm,
What you're experiencing is not different, right? Other people are experiencing the same as well. One of the things that I've often encountered is people often suffer in silence
yeah.
because they think that this is too different, too much, right? And so I
Mm,
want to say to you that you are not alone. If you ever have thoughts of self harm or anything like that, please use 988. It's
mm,
the crisis line, and you can call or text.
yeah.
I also want to encourage people to think about what approach is best for them. If you want to
Mm,
start with mental health, right, in that traditional sense, start there, right? If you want to seek out treatment for substance use or another addictive pattern, that's okay. Start there. Even start with one of the groups that exist, the peer support groups
yeah.
here in Minnesota, right? So. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous. There are family programs as well. If going to a provider right away doesn't feel like a right fit, maybe try there instead. But there are a number of avenues that you can engage in order to see what you want.
Okay. So just to clarify, right? Do insurance companies cover addiction care, right? So my
Yes, they
they
do.
did it. Okay.
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Okay. Thanks for that. So another question here from me, right? I know like you have already talked about some of these, but what are other like non-medical strategies, right? Strategies like if someone is, going through, have an addiction, how can they overcome it? What are some things they can do instead of them maybe seeking a therapist or something like what
Mhm.
what are the things they can do to cope with that
Yeah.
or to overcome it?
So non-medical strategies. So I will say therapy is a non-medical strategy. Uh,
Oh,
so even if it's just a consultation and you want to explore whether it's a right fit for you,
yeah.
that's part of what we do as well. In terms of like self-help routes, there
Mm,
are a number of good books on addictive patterns. I really stress mindfulness
mm,
and the ability to bring awareness to what you're thinking and feeling, because
mm,
that's often what we're running from when we're
okay.
engaged in addictive patterns.
Okay.
And so the more you're aware of what's happening internally,
Mhm,
the more you can address it.
okay.
And so that's why I pair mindfulness with other therapeutic modalities, because if you don't know what's happening inside you, right, how can we really get to the root of the problem?
Yeah.
And then again, there are a number of support groups, some that I've mentioned already,
Yeah. Okay.
and call a friend.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I mean, it's like as a therapist, where you are providing us some free bonus services here tonight. And to our listeners,
First one's
so
free.
exactly. Again, right? That's the beauty of Cycle Podcast. That we bring folks like you here that really educate our community, provide some good knowledge. That folks can take away to really help them. So as I said, already, it's a 1 hour show. We are already at the top of the hour, so we just have our panelists ask their last questions, and then we'll let Joanna. She's a mother, and she wears so many hats. That's what I say. We connect people all night. So, Stanford, your last question to Joanna.
I don't want to say the last question, but I just leave it as it is because I've learned a lot tonight. But I hope that you can come back because there are still more questions to be answered as it relates to this topic. Because we've been on the topic of mental health for a long time, which is something that is very important in our society nowadays. But what I'll say to you is. In our community, our black community, or African community, or African American community, whatever. But what um what advice can you give out there? Can you put out there to people who's watching right now? Um, that'll be able to help them not to like walk in the path of addiction. Because like we started, it starts small. It starts a little bit, and then it goes, gradually. So, what advice can you put out there for our community? Our community nowadays, our community. I can't say it out too loud. What advice do you have? Because all the addiction and stuff, mostly that we see, is in our community. So, what advice can you put out there? For especially the younger ones.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't help but think of the system, right?
Mm.
The institutions that kind of govern our life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to take it macro because there is something to be said for all of the systemic inequities, right?
Mm-hmm.
The disenfranchisement, the discrimination, the bias, and the outright racism that we experience
Mm-hmm.
often exacerbate addictive patterns. Those systems are designed to have us think that we are inferior in some way, and
Mm.
I work in my work to disprove that theory because
Mm.
we are not inferior.
Mm.
We are
Okay.
worth being whole.
Mm.
And so how do we find places where we can be seen and be whole? My
Yeah.
advice to those who are feeling the brunt of the world today, who are
Mm-hmm.
struggling for
Mm-hmm.
young kids, is to know your worth
Mm.
because you matter.
Yeah.
You matter to us.
Okay.
And I'm only one therapist, and so I do my best, right, in my daily work to ensure that our Blackness is an asset. It is not a deficit, because we don't have a whole lot of spaces that tell us that.
Okay.
So I want to say you matter, and find the places and spaces where you feel like you matter.
Okay.
Because that can often increase our resilience towards addictive patterns.
Great. Great. That's a good one. That's powerful. Andrea, your last question to Joanna.
That was deep. I don't even know
Yeah,
if I'm
that's
going to
deep, right?
add anything.
You got me thinking. You got me thinking there. That's deep, right? I was, I was in a state of coma for a minute, but hey, right? Yeah, that was deep. Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
Joanna, thank
The
you so much.
deepness is know your worth.
Yeah, that was like I had to. That was just a reminder for everybody. Joanna, thank you so much. We can't thank you enough. I know we've said it many times. Thank you. This has been an absolute just pleasure, just connecting with you and just learning more. And I'm happy that the community gets to experience you and all that you come with. One thing that I just wanted to just touch upon real quickly here is, can you um can you just share briefly like how important therapy and community support in like a person's recovery process is, like so that they're aware, because like I think it was Stanford that mentioned sometimes some person may like self isolate, maybe that's their coping mechanism to like reground, but like when it comes to having community, can you just talk briefly just about how important that is so that folks know like, hey, this is okay, and it's kind of like a community centered thing to help a
Mhm.
person or a loved one.
Mhm. Well, I think we have to acknowledge that sometimes we unintentionally or sometimes intentionally stigmatize those engaging in addictive patterns. And so I want to say that first. Community is vital to recovery. It is the whole reason why there are groups dedicated to recovery support, because community is vital, and you have a better chance of recovery when you're connected to community, when you're connected to the people who support your recovery and who understand your recovery.
Okay.
And so that's why in substance use treatment, thankfully in Minnesota, there's been a higher percentage of peer recovery support specialists. Those are people with lived experience who are in recovery that support people newly in recovery.
Wow.
They know how to walk that journey with you.
Okay.
And so that's really, really important. And again, speaks to all of the support groups that are out there for recovery and other addictive patterns, because there is a shared understanding of what that experience is, and also a collective movement towards growth.
Okay. The last question for one of our listeners, right? And he's thanking you, and you're providing some great insights tonight. What are some of the biggest barriers for, like, for us seeking treatment, for addiction in our community? What are some of the biggest barriers? I know you mentioned systemic stuff, but what are other barriers?
Yes. Systemic barriers. Unfortunately, there are some treatment programs that are not culturally responsive and trauma informed.
Okay.
And so that in and of itself means that our kids got home.
No, you're good. Work-life balance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It means that those of us that seek treatment find it harder to be in that space because it's not conducive to who we are culturally.
Okay.
And then it doesn't take into account our lived experiences, right, in being trauma informed. And so sometimes they might apply a one size fits all, and if you don't fit, then you have to leave. And so sometimes those programs can be a bit punitive or be very emphatic on the rules that they want you to follow. And so that's why I encourage people to do your research in the kind of programs that you want to recommend to a family member or friend, or if you're looking for treatment yourself. Is it reflective of you? Is it in line with what you hope your goal is? And then also, how will you be in that space? Because that matters as well. There are programs more tailored for the Black community, which exist in our city, which is great. And then there are some that are bigger and just, right, is kind of like a mill. And so you also have to be cognizant of that dynamic as well. Yet, like I said before, any treatment is treatment, and it's all towards the goal. So, right, if one thing doesn't work, what's the next thing?
Okay. Well, Joanna, man, thank you so much for tonight, right? It's like you have provided some great knowledge, some great conversation. As I said, right, you provided a therapy session for 1 hour, 13 minutes straight. A live therapy session, Psycho Podcast, and that's great, right? We can't thank you enough. But, as well, as you leave here tonight, and thanks so much for coming on, but as you leave tonight, I mean, a lot of folks, not only the barriers, right, to seeking help, but sometimes we don't even want to seek help. We don't, like, in our community, we don't want to seek help, right? It's like, I'm a tough guy. We Black people, right? Because maybe we've been through a lot. We tend to hold a lot of stuff in. What's the message you want to leave with us tonight, right? To all the folks listening. I mean, Psycho Podcast all over, right, the United States, right? What's the message you want to leave with Black folks out there that are listening to you tonight? Don't just hold that in, man, right? Don't just be drinking alcohol every weekend or every day. You feel it. I'm tough, I'm cool, right? Hey, what message you want to leave with them tonight? That maybe you need to seek help or, do something about it.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my heart is that you are worth the space. You are worth the space of seeking a therapist or seeking treatment. You are worth that. And so how do you challenge the doubt that you may have of being in that space? Because you're worth it.
Okay. Well, man, that concludes the end of our show tonight, Johanna. Man, you were exact. As I said, your knowledge is powerful. You are ready. So thank you so.
Thank you for the time.
That's the end of our show tonight. Inner Cycle Podcast. This whole month of February, we've got mental health topics, and Joanna kind of a guest closer out tonight. So thank you so much, Joanna Rosa. We hope you can come back on Inner Cycle Podcast to educate our folks. You'll be a resource for us whenever we want to discuss mental health and addiction. So, but thank you so much. You have a good night. I know you got to attend to the kids at home. So thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Together as one, we've created a home. So join the conversation. Let's set the tone. In a circle.